All right. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever applies to you, depending on when you're watching this and where you're watching this from. If you're watching this live, then I'll say good evening to you. And if you're somewhere on the East Coast, in that particular time zone, I am, if it looks like I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at different places. Today, I'm trying something new. I am also, while I'm here on Facebook Live, which is where I've been doing this every day, I've decided to go live on TikTok as well. So occasionally you're going to see me looking down at my TikTok camera, which is down here. Um, and my Facebook and YouTube camera is up there. So you'll see me, maybe see my eyes going back and forth, and I'll try to keep up with the comments as well. But this is the Conscious Bishop, B. Jamel Broadnax, and this is actually day number 17 of Everyday Spirituality. If you're watching this on TikTok live, then you have missed days 1 through 16. So if you're watching on TikTok, and I'm going to go to that camera why I say that, if you're watching on TikTok, you'll need to go back to my Facebook page, and you can find me on Facebook as the Conscious Bishop, just like you see here on TikTok as well. And you can go back and hear days 1 through 16. And I promise you, it is worth your while. It is, these moments are absolutely life changing. So let's get started. Hello to my Facebook viewers, YouTube viewers, and TikTok viewers. Okay, let's get started here. So today, um, in day number 17 of Everyday Spirituality, we're going to talk from the subject, the sacred moment. Now, TikTok would not allow me to put the whole subject that as I did in on Facebook. The entire topic, the subject tonight is the sacred moment, responding, not reacting. That's right. The sacred moment, responding, not reacting. So family, tonight we're going to talk about this thing. All right, we're going to get deep, and we're going to go below the surface, and we're going to also tap into the subconscious, where you're not just listening with your ears and your brain, but you're going to listen with your subconscious. I'm speaking to your subconscious. I've just brought you into conscious awareness. So now your subconscious is paying attention to me. All right. And so is your spirit. So tonight, I want to name something sacred that a lot of people overlook. So the previous few nights, we've talked about several things. We've talked about awareness. We've talked about introspection. We've talked about identifying ego. We've talked about allowing what shows up without judgment. But tonight, I want to talk about the sacred moment. What is the sacred moment? What are we talking about? The sacred moment is that moment of choice. Listen, guys, before any scenario that you're in, any um, situation, conversation, whatever the case, there is always a sacred moment. And what is that sacred moment again? The sacred moment is the moment of choice. Choice is the most powerful tool and the most powerful power that you have. Choice. That is your choice is your superpower. Choice is supernatural. Choice is spiritual. Are you hearing me? Choice is sacred. And that moment of choice is a sacred moment. And that's the sacred moment we want to talk about tonight. So, as I stated earlier, there's always, and I'm putting emphasis on the word always, there is always a moment. Even if it's brief, there's always a moment between stimulus and response. Even if it's very brief, there's always a moment between emotion and action. And that moment is what we're calling tonight your sacred moment. That's right, Brother Solomon. So glad to see you on here. That's right. Choice is your superpower. Thank you for typing that in the comments. That's right. Choice is your superpower. So, yes, there. I know I'm going to leave that on the screen for a few moments. I know on TikTok, you guys can't see that, but you can also go over and join me on Facebook if you want to. That's where most people are tonight. But again, yes, choice is your superpower. And as I stated earlier, there's always a moment of choice. There's always a moment between stimulus and response. There's always a moment between emotion and action. And that, even if it's a brief moment, it always exists. And that moment is your sacred moment. It may last for a second. It may feel small. It may feel minute, but it's powerful. Are you hearing me? Because in that moment, in that sacred moment, everything is possible. In that sacred moment, anything is possible. So the question becomes, what will you do? Because remember, we said you always have that moment, no matter, even if it's a brief moment, there's always the sacred moment. There's always a moment between stimulus and response. There's always a moment between emotion and reaction. And that is your sacred moment. And the question I want to ask you tonight is, what will you do with your sacred moment? When the next scenario presents itself, you're going to have a sacred moment. There's no doubt about that. But the question becomes, what will you do with your sacred moment? What will you do in your sacred moment? Will you pause? Will you be still and know? Will you pause? What will you do in your sacred moment? Will you pause or will you react? Will you breathe or will you explode? What will you do in your sacred moment? What will you do with your sacred moment? Will you listen? Let me put my hand here when I say listen, because that's the voice you need to hear. The voice comes from here. Will you listen or will you lash out? In that sacred moment, there's always two voices competing. And I want to ask you, in your sacred moment, will you listen for the still small voice? Or will you listen to the loud, boisterous voice of ego? Because hear this clearly, guys. Ego, matter of fact, I'm going to say it a different way. Wherever your belief system is or no belief at all, I'm going to use the term God. Okay, you can use whatever term you want to use, spirit, source, or higher self, whatever you want to use. I'm going to use the term God. It's just a word. It's just a word. Don't be afraid of a word. So I'm going to use the term God. So I'm going to say this. Well, let me ask the question again. Will you listen in your moment, in your sacred moment? There's always two competing voices. And in your sacred moment, will you listen to the still small voice? Or will you listen to the loud, boisterous voice of ego? Because God is not in the loudness. Oh my goodness, do you hear me tonight? God is not in the loudness. Ego is in the loudness. God is in the stillness. God or spirit or source or the all, God is in the whisper, the still small voice within. Whatever your perspectives are about the Bible, there's some good stuff in there. So I want to look at a scripture, 1 Kings 19 and 11. I think I've probably said this several times this week, but First Kings 19 says that God was not in the wind. God was not in the earthquake. God was not in the fire when Elijah was looking for it. But God was in the still small voice. God or spirit or your higher self, whatever, God is not in the loudness. God is in the stillness. Here's the reality. Most people don't even hear God. And I know I'm dealing with a mixed audience of people who feel different ways about God, but don't let the term scare you tonight. Or I should say trigger you, all right? For those of you that don't believe in a particular version of God. We're not talking about an angry old man with a long beard up in the sky. No, we're talking about the all. We're talking about infinite energy. We're talking about the all in all, okay? So, hey, my brother, so good to see you, Brother Henry. Thank you, sir. But again, God's not in the loudness, God's in the stillness. And hear this, guys, most people actually never hear God. I'm talking about, I'm not just talking about people that may call themselves non-believers or people not of faith. I'm talking about some of you tongue-talking mogul jogos. I'm talking about some of you pastors. I'm talking about you prophets that call yourself prophets and pastors and evangelists and teachers and preachers and bishops. Most of you don't even hear God. And you know why you don't hear God? Most people don't hear God because they don't know how. And here's why. Because most people mistake the voice of God for their own ego voice, for their own ego's voice. Let me say that again because I got a little tongue tied on that. Most people mistake the voice of God for their own ego's voice. Why? Because it's so loud. Because it's so loud. You see, let me share this with you guys. Most people mistake the voice of God for their own ego's voice because it's loud. And here's the thing about that. And they've never been trained. Excuse me, not they. Let me say that in a different way. So most people mistake their ego's voice for God's voice, and they've trained themselves to follow that voice. Oh man, we're getting into something tonight, guys. So not only do most people never hear God's voice, not only do most people mistake God's voice for their ego's voice because it's loud, but they've trained themselves to follow that voice. They've trained themselves to respect and to recognize that voice as the voice of God. And this is the reason why their life and some of your lives are filled with misadventure. Your life is like lemony snickets, okay? Your life has become a series of unfortunate events. Why? Because you truly have no real perception of the Spirit's voice. You've trained your ear to hear, and you hear very well, but it's not God's voice that you're hearing. So, again, most people mistake their ego's voice for the voice of God. Okay, because it's loud. The ego yells. The ego demands. The ego rushes. The ego reacts, and because it's louder, people assume it's right. But hear this, guys: loud don't mean right. God or spirit whispers. Ego shouts. God just simply invites. Spirit invites. It's like open. But ego pushes. And you know how sometimes, man, and Listen, guys, I know what some of you think. You think, oh no, it's God. You know, and God was pushing me. God, you got to do it now. You got to do it now. God, I mean, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't rest. And you think that's God. That's your ego. Because God doesn't push. God doesn't rush. Man, I just messed some people up with that one on Facebook. Because you know, you got that voice. I got to do it. I got to do it now. Oh, I got to do it now. It's troubling me. It's troubling my spirit. I got to do it now. And you think that's God. And you trained yourself because that's what you've done all your life. And you've trained yourself to respect that voice and that urgency at Mando. You've trained yourself to respect that voice and that urgency as God. But it ain't God. That is your ego. God is not pushy. God is the still small voice. God is not in the pushiness. God is not in the rush. God is in the stillness. God is in the waiting. Ego pushes. God simply invites. He shows the way and invites. Ego rushes. God waits. Like that song, those of you that grew up in the church, that song says, He was there all the time. He was there all the time, waiting patiently in line. He was there. It goes up, but I can't get up there. All the time, okay? God rushes. So that urgency and that push, that ain't God, y'all. That's your ego. But the reason why you think it's God, no, I know the voice of God. No, I know God's voice. I know, and it troubles me. And if I don't do it, I'm gonna get a whooping. And if I don't do it, I'm gonna. I said all that stuff. Sorry, didn't mean to cuss. I said all that stuff. But I'm telling you tonight, if you listen to me, that ain't God. That is your ego. So calm the hell down. Pardon my French, but I'm using exaggerated language to make an exaggerated point. Calm the hell down and know that's not God. That is your ego. God is not in the rush, but you've trained yourself to believe that that's God. So you think that's what God sounds like. You think that's what the Spirit's urging feels like because you've trained yourself to respect your ego's voice as God's voice. Oh my goodness. This is good to me tonight. This ain't just good to me. This is correcting me. All right. What I say unto you, I say unto me. Woo! Y'all get anything out of this tonight like I am? Okay. This is why the scripture keeps pointing us back to that sacred moment. James 1:19 says, be quick to listen. And you don't really listen here. You listen from here. Uh-oh, y'all. That's my pizza. Hold on. Don't go nowhere. I didn't know it was going to be here that quick. Hold on, y'all. Okay, y'all, I'm coming. Sorry. Hold tight. But like I said, we trained ourselves. ourselves to respect the ego as God's voice. But it's not God. It's ego. I'm coming. I got to put my pizza in the oven to keep it warm, so just hang with me. All right. Y'all, I am so sorry. I didn't think it was going to come that quick. My apologies. All right. So that, you know what that means now. I got to finish this because it's time to eat. All right. So be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. All right. That's the sacred moment. Proverbs 17:27-28 says, the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint. And listen to this next part. It says, even a fool is considered wise when he remains silent. That's the sacred moment. The sacred moment is being still and knowing. Stillness is where knowing happens. Stillness is where God speaks. Let's talk about reaction versus response in that sacred moment. I hope y'all still with me. I'm sorry, my pizza came. Hopefully I didn't take too long, but reaction skips the sacred moment. And remember, you always have the sacred moment. I know some of y'all say, oh, I blacked out. No, you didn't just black out. Before you blacked out, you had a sacred moment. And in that sacred moment, you made a choice. Because the sacred moment is the moment of choice. All I know, they talk about my mama and I just saw red. Yes, but before you saw red, you had a sacred moment. There is always a sacred moment, even if it's only for 1 second. What will you do in your sacred moment? Reaction skips the sacred moment, or reaction ignores it and rebukes the sacred moment. The reaction said, F you, sacred moment. But response honors it. So we're talking about reaction versus response. Reaction is automatic, but response is conscious. Reaction comes from ego. We know that. Response comes from awareness. And listen, guys, we've been talking almost all week about, and part of last week, about healing. So let me help you with something. You don't heal by never feeling that emotion again. That's not how you heal. That's not healing. Never feeling the emotion again. That's not the path that leads to healing. Never feeling that emotion. Remember yesterday we said, don't rebuke it. We said, don't dismiss it. Don't rebuke it. Don't resist it. But allow it and sit with it. So you don't heal by never feeling that emotion again. You heal when you use the sacred moment to choose differently. You don't stop feeling, but you stop being run by it. Healing doesn't mean anger never shows up. Healing doesn't mean that hurt never arises. Healing means emotion no longer controls my behavior. The feeling can rise, but the sacred moment determines what happens next. The sacred moment, the moment of choice, that pause, that breath, that even if only a second, that second of awareness. That is where spirit lives. Good evening, my sister. I love you and you're in my prayers. Grand evening to you. That is in the sacred moment, in that second of awareness, in that pause, in that breath. That's where spirit lives. That's where what some call God lives. That's where consciousness lives. That's where, in that sacred moment, That's where you get to decide. In that sacred moment, you decide, will I react the old way or will I respond from awareness? Now, look, guys, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. And breath helps you become present again. So learn to pause and breathe. All right, I got to close this, but what does response sound like as opposed to reaction? Response sounds like this. Let me take a moment before I answer. Response sounds like, that brought up something in me. You notice how I'm not ignoring it. I'm just not allowing it to control me. I'm bringing awareness to it. Do you see? So that's what response sounds like. That brought up something in me. Response sounds like this. I don't want to react. This is what I did in my sacred moment. I said, I don't want to react. I want to respond. Response sounds like this in that sacred moment. I need a second. These sentences that I just gave you, let me see, what were they like? This brought up something in me. I don't want to react. I want to respond. I need a moment. I need a second. Let me take a moment before I answer. All of those sentences are holy. Those pauses are sacred. That's the sacred moment in action. And let me tell you how you know it's working. Here's how you know awareness is integrating. And I'm going to give myself some praise. Glory be to me. Because I see it in myself. And that's not being, that's not ego talking there. That's not being braggadocious, but that's honoring myself. I've noticed that these signs exist in my life, so I know that awareness is integrating. How do you know when awareness is integrating? You pause more. You breathe more. You listen longer. You speak slower. Slow down. You recover faster when you do react, because you're going to react sometimes. But you know that awareness, that it's working, and that awareness is being integrated. When you do react, you recover faster. And that's growth. That's not perfection, like I said earlier, but it is presence. So I'm going to close this. God doesn't shout over your ego. Spirit doesn't shout over your ego. God waits for your stillness. And I should say, God waits in the stillness. And the sacred moment is where you choose which voice you're going to follow. Thank you for the hearts on TikTok. When you honor the sacred moment, your life begins to change. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're listening deeper. If you're watching on TikTok, you don't know this, but we close with an affirmation every night. So here's our affirmation for tonight. I honor the sacred moment. Come on, say it with me. I honor the sacred moment. I pause. I breathe. I listen for the still small voice. So tonight, remember this. Between stimulus and response, there is a sacred moment. Between emotion an action, there's a sacred moment. What you do with that moment, what you do with and in your sacred moment shapes what's going to happen next. And it also shapes who you're becoming. Honor that sacred moment. Like I always say, if you're watching this and this has been a blessing to you in some way, I want to invite you to be a part of my spiritual journey by connecting with me personally. Of course, here on social media, but I want to tell you about the Spiritual Life Center. At the Spiritual Life Center, we're practicing stillness, we're practicing awareness, we're practicing presence, and we're practicing oneness. Oneness with what we call God and oneness with ourselves. At the Spiritual Life Center, we meet every Sunday at 12 noon at 1519 Bartow Place in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm telling you, the corporate gathering is absolutely amazing. You want to be a part of that. And I want to invite you to be a part of that. Again, it's every Sunday at 12 noon. You can also watch us live on Facebook. We come on roughly around 1 p.m. on Facebook Live on my page, The Conscious Bishop. It also says Bishop B. Jamel Broadnax. All right, guys, at the Spiritual Life Center, we honor the God outside of you without ignoring the God inside of you. Thank you for being with me tonight. I'm going to let you guys go. Have a good night. I don't even know how to end TikTok, but I'm going to figure it out in a minute. I think I see it. Good night. Love y'all. Be love. God is love. So go be love. All right. See ya. Oh, I didn't stop it. I don't know. Let me see if I did it right.